Hi, my name's Nick Barter. This is an initial and high-level first flush review of results from a survey called Perceptions of Organizations in the Environment, conducted between November 2016 to January 2017 that had 821 respondents. I'm going to go through a rationale for the survey, some basics on who completed it, some initial results, summary and next steps. One of the rationales for it was this separate circles construct that many people have come across in textbooks, saying there's the economy, society, and environment, three separate circles that need to overlap. Now, the problem is that's pretty artificial. It doesn't match our lived reality, as the CEO of an organization once pointed out to me. And in academic speak, that means that we've got a fractured knowledge base, a fractured epistemology. Our theories don't match reality. And then we think about what everyone knows. And every one of us know, when we're asked where the environment is, we all go everywhere. So we know there's not some separate space that it exists in. Similarly, I did a small survey of ecopreneurs, and I asked them what they thought the environment was. And they said, I don't think about the environment as separate. I think about the air I breathe and the water I drink. So these were interesting points to me, but we need a big survey to create statistical validity, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I'm not going to talk about statistical validity today, just some broad brush results based on percentages. The people who completed the survey, good split between male and female. And you can see there in terms of education level, vast majority had a bachelor's degree or above. Similarly, good chunk of them had studied strategy, 81%, good chunk had studied sustainability, 62%. So you can say we had a highly educated bunch of respondents in that 821 who've come across business and sustainability. The other thing we see in terms of country and residence is vast majority from Australia, good chunk from UK, and a reasonable chunk from the USA, and the remaining percentages were from across all the countries of the world. You can see as well in terms of employment, vast majority were employed full-time or self-employed or part-time. And then in terms of who they worked for, a good 60% worked for a private organization or a PLC, a company listed on the stock exchange, and then a good 24% worked for a public sector. So you can see in the main, overall, the people were predominantly Australian or UK, working full-time, mostly in the private sector. And then in terms of size of organization, they work for organizations across the range in size. So there's no particular spike points there you see in terms of size of organization. But how did they respond? Now, one of the ways they were asked to respond was what they thought of their relationship between self and nature. And you can see 1 through 7 across the top there, more or less overlap. And one of the things you see here is that there's a fairly even split, with very few people saying they had no overlap. Okay? But very few, really, overall, saying there was total overlap. Everybody's kind of across that middle range. Then when you ask them where they saw their organization and its environment, the organization they worked for, and how it related to the environment, 1 through 7, you can see actually there was a higher spike here in terms of less overlap. And when you map that to looking at how people perceive themselves, the blue line, and the organization they work for, the red line, you can see gap with a shifting towards less overlap for the organization and environment relative to self and nature. And that gap, that space between the red line and the blue line is undoubtedly a problem, because it tells us that actually the way we think of ourselves is very dissimilar to the way we perceive our organization operations. There's a gap between who we are and what our organization is. Now, that may be or may not be appropriate, but what it also points to is challenges in terms of motivation, because we know people are more motivated if there's an alignment between who they are and the goals of the organization. And it also points to a challenge that organizations don't exist in a separate world to us, yet maybe they're operating as if they are. Yeah? And that's unsustainable, ultimately, as we could all quite logically conclude. Then when we asked those organizations where respondents thought their organization was and what they thought the ideal and worst relationship to achieve SD was, we see this. We see everybody recognizes the ideal relationship is more overlap, and everybody recognizes the worst relationship is less overlap or no overlap, as in terms of response 1 versus response 7 being ideal. Now that's useful for us to know, because it means that intuitively individuals understand that if you want more sustainability, you need total overlap. If you want less sustainability or non-sustainable, no overlap is the way to do it. But also then, when we move on, the other last key finding I want to share with you is, what questions do people think need to be asked of organizations to realize sustainable outcomes? And the dark grey bars show the high percentages, and what they show is the types of strategic questions we should be asking ourselves are: the air I breathe. How will the gaseous outputs of this organization impact the air I breathe? And if that's not positive, then clearly you're going to say, well, how do I make it not impact the air I breathe? So I would want to breathe it. How do the liquid outputs impact on the water I drink? You know? And again, how are the solid waste disposed of in my neighborhood? Again, these close, non-distant, very human questions, as opposed to, do my gaseous outputs meet regulation? Do my liquid outputs on the environment? Those more distant, less human questions don't work for people as well in terms of achieving sustainable outcomes as those more close, more human questions. The air I breathe, the water I drink, my neighborhood. And that's interesting to us because that actually points us into a notion where we actually intuitively understand our entwinement, this overlap that we have with everything around us. And so the key lesson, I think, is that one of the key lessons of this results is, if you really want to start creating sustainable outcomes in your organization, start asking those personal type questions of the air I breathe, the water I drink, my neighborhood. The other thing to say then, in summary, and where to from here, we see a gap between ourselves and the organizations we work for. That may be a problem in terms of motivation. We understand that the more overlap leads to more sustainability. We understand that less distance, i.e. more human questions, make for sustainable outcomes. And the next stage is to do thorough statistical analysis of this, an analysis of all the comments that everybody made, so we can get more concrete, more statistically valid answers, and work out what the next stages of research are. Thanks for listening.